Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein?
Yes, we are. Because if nobody cares about Epstein, then why all the deflection? Earlier this year, the Trump administration made a big show of releasing files. They gave binders to conservative influencers, they promised transparency, but did not deliver. Flash forward to December, and we finally got some new documents. But while everyone was losing their minds over Bill Clinton in a hot tub, did you hear what Rep. Thomas Massie said to the press?
Epstein also had close ties to our own intelligence agencies and Israel's intelligence agencies.
And while everyone was counting how many times Trump's name appeared in the flight logs, did you catch that Ghislaine Maxwell has her helicopter pilot license? And that helicopters don't require the same flight logs as planes? And maybe most importantly, were you paying attention to what was happening in the world while these files were being released? Because I think that might be the point. The internet has been ruthless with these drops. People are treating unverified tips like smoking guns. And the real story, the intelligence connections, the blackmail operation, the system that protected Epstein for decades, is getting buried under 2 million pages of documents, which is exactly what they want. So I did something a little different. I stepped back. I researched the actual facts. I separated what we know from what we're being told to believe, because I think this entire story was engineered deception from the start. And if we're going to understand what really happened with Jeffrey Epstein, we need to keep our facts straight. So this is the full story of all the things that the average person has probably missed because the group behind it doesn't want you to know. This is who Epstein really was, who he worked for, and why the truth is still being deliberately obscured. So I want to start with a quick breakdown of who Jeffrey Epstein actually was, because once you know his backstory, the official narrative starts to unravel. If you ask Google, you'll get the sanitized version, right? Teacher turned financier, mysterious billionaire, convicted SO. But what if I told you that doesn't even scratch the surface? Jeffrey Epstein claimed to have grown up in working class South Brooklyn, but records show he actually lived in Seagate. Seagate is New York City's oldest gated community, and in the 50s and 60s, when Epstein was growing up there, it was middle class and heavily Jewish. His family home was right across the street from Seagate's oldest synagogue. His parents, Seymour and Paula Epstein, were both children of European immigrants, though their exact origins are unclear. So how does a middle-class kid from a gated Jewish community in Brooklyn end up rubbing elbows with presidents, princes, and billionaires? Here's where it gets interesting. Epstein got his big break while teaching math at the Dalton School, which is an elite Manhattan prep school. And the headmaster at the time, Donald Barr, father of Attorney General Bill Barr, had a reputation for hiring young people without a lot of credentials. But even for Dalton, Epstein was an unusual hire. He was 21 years old, he had no college degree, he dropped out of both Cooper Union and NYU, and yet he landed a job teaching the children of New York's wealthiest families. And that's where he made the connections that would change his life. In early 1976, Epstein was invited to an art gallery reception in Midtown Manhattan by a Dalton parent. And at that event, he was introduced to Ace Greenberg, a top executive at Bear Stearns, one of Wall Street's most powerful firms. The parent told Greenberg that Epstein was wasting his time at Dalton, and Greenberg invited Epstein for an interview. Now here's the thing. When Epstein showed up, he didn't have any idea how Wall Street worked. Okay, but Greenberg was impressed anyway. Why? Well, because Epstein had a talent, and it wasn't finance. He was just a hell of a salesman. Epstein got the job, and shortly after, he got caught lying about having degrees from 2 California universities on his resume. But they kept him on anyway, because Epstein quickly proved his real skill, charming wealthy clients. One secret to Epstein's early success was his close relationship with Jimmy Kane, a senior executive at Bear Stearns who would eventually run the entire firm. According to several of their colleagues, Epstein was helping Kane pursue women and score drugs. Kane praised Epstein to anyone who would listen and began introducing him to some of Bear Stearns' most lucrative clients. But here's where the pattern starts to emerge, okay? Jimmy Kane was also hired by Ace Greenberg. And Kane was also a college dropout. In fact, Ace Greenberg had a preference. He openly said he liked to hire what he called PSDs, people who were poor, smart, and had a deep desire to become rich. People who were hungry. People who might be willing to do things others wouldn't. Now, I want you to consider something. Was this firm possibly scouting for a certain type of person. Because here's another fun fact about Ace Greenberg. He was a member of Zeta Beta Tau, a fraternity whose Greek letters are taken from the first letters of this Hebrew phrase, which literally translates to Zion shall be redeemed with justice, also sometimes translated as with judgment. ZBT was the first Zionist fraternity in America. And another interesting fact about Ace Greenberg, well, he was enrolled in college, participating actively in ZBT when Israel was declared a state. Now, I'm not saying this proves anything. I'm not. But when you start connecting the dots, Epstein grew up in a gated Jewish community. He was hired by a school with a preference for hiring young men without degrees, scouted by a boss who was in the first Zionist fraternity, and then he developed a knack for helping powerful people with their vices. Well, you start to see a pattern, right? So the question we need to ask is, was Jeffrey Epstein even hired to be a financier? Or was he selected because he was hungry and willing to do things that others wouldn't? And could be loyal to a certain young country in the Middle East? Well, to answer that, let's look at another man that helped Epstein make a big breakthrough. Leslie Wexner. Wexner was the billionaire founder of L Brands, which included stores like Victoria's Secret, Limited Too, Abercrombie & Fitch, and Bath & Body Works. Basically all the stores that a millennial like myself shopped at growing up. It's actually kind of disgusting that I bought my first bra at a store linked to Jeffrey Epstein. But anyway, for reasons that have never been fully explained, Wexner gave Jeffrey Epstein, a guy with no college degree and a mysteriously short Wall Street career, complete power of attorney over his fortune. Now, power of attorney means Epstein could sign Wexner's name, make decisions on his behalf, control his money. Why would one of America's richest men give essentially a nobody that kind of power? Well, Wexner later claimed he was manipulated by Epstein, but that doesn't explain how Epstein ended up with Wexner's Manhattan mansion, the largest private residence in New York City, which, if you know the story, is the same mansion where many of Epstein's crimes would later take place. But let's take it another layer deeper. Wexner founded something called the Wexner Foundation, an organization whose mission is to strengthen leadership in the Northern American Jewish community and the State of Israel. Epstein was listed as a trustee of the Wexner Foundation. He formally approved annual grants, he signed documents appointing foundation officers. He was also named president of the Wexner Family Financial Office. But here's the weird part. According to a later review, Epstein was absent from the organizational life of the foundation. He never had an office there. Foundation leaders said they never saw him present at the foundation offices. So let me get this straight. Epstein was a trustee with signing power over grants to strengthen Israeli leadership. He was president of Wexner's financial office, but he was never actually there. He was a ghost with power. Just think about what that means. So Epstein went from teaching high school math to managing billions for one of the world's wealthiest men, a man with deep ties to Israeli leadership development. And once he had Wexner's backing and billions at his disposal, doors started opening everywhere. And what did he do with those open doors? Well, he started building a network. And I'm not talking about normal networking. I'm talking about presidents, prime ministers, Nobel Prize winners, billionaires, and Hollywood stars. So let's just do a quick roll call of some of the most notable. Bill Clinton flew on Epstein's private jet, nicknamed Lolita Express, at least 26 times, according to flight logs. Donald Trump was photographed with Epstein throughout the 90s and early 2000s. Prince Andrew, the British royal. Bill Gates met with Epstein multiple times. After Epstein's 2008 conviction, mind you, Gates later said he regretted the relationship. I bet he did. Scientists like MIT's Marvin Minsky and even Stephen Hawking visited Epstein's island. Celebrities like Kevin Spacey, Chris Tucker, Naomi Campbell were photographed on his plane or at his parties. CEOs, hedge fund managers, academics, Epstein had access to everyone. Now, here's what you need to understand. This wasn't just a guy who liked to party with famous people. No, this was a guy who collected powerful people. He had something on everyone. Photos, flight logs, witnesses, and the question we need to ask is why? Why would a financier with no Ivy League degree have this kind of access? Why would world leaders, Nobel laureates, and billionaires fly to his private island? What was Epstein really doing? And who was he doing it for? Because there's evidence that Jeffrey Epstein wasn't just a predator with powerful friends. And if you're just now realizing how deep this goes, hit subscribe and like this video because we're about to go even deeper. Okay, deep breath, because this is where things get even more complicated. And I want to be very clear, this is in no way the entire story of Epstein's possible intelligence connections. But I am going to show you that based on the information publicly available, it is highly likely that Jeffrey Epstein was not only an intelligence asset for Israel, but possibly part of a wider global intelligence network. Allegedly, of course. Let's start with the most documented connection, Israel. Remember Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's right-hand woman and accomplice? Her father was Robert Maxwell, and Robert Maxwell wasn't just a British media mogul. Robert Maxwell had alleged ties to Israeli intelligence, specifically Mossad. In 1991, he brought a libel action against American author Seymour M. Hersh for suggesting in his book, The Samson Option, that Maxwell had ties to Mossad, had helped arrange the sale of Israeli arms to Iran, and had helped Israeli agents kidnap an Israeli nuclear technician. A few weeks later, Maxwell died under mysterious circumstances, falling off his yacht into the Atlantic Ocean. And then something remarkable happened. He was given what many have described as a hero's funeral in Jerusalem. He was buried on the Mount of Olives, one of the most sacred sites in Judaism. Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir attended, President Chaim Herzog attended, and at least 6 serving and former heads of Israeli intelligence also attended. This wasn't the funeral of a businessman, right? This seems like the funeral of someone who had served the state of Israel. Despite living in Oxford, England, Israel claimed him as their own. Robert Maxwell's connections didn't stop with Israel. No, he also had ties to British intelligence. And here's something that should make you very uncomfortable. Robert Maxwell owned McGraw-Hill, the company that published the textbooks that I, myself, and millions of American students grew up reading and learning from. So you have a man with alleged intelligence ties controlling what goes into American textbooks. And his daughter, Ghislaine, became Jeffrey Epstein's closest associate. Coincidence? Well, what do you think? Moving on, in 2016, Ehud Barak, former Prime Minister of Israel and former head of Israeli military intelligence, was photographed entering Jeffrey Epstein's Manhattan townhouse. Now, this was after Epstein's 2008 conviction, mind you. Barak later admitted he'd visited Epstein's home about 10 times over several years. He claimed the visits were professional and that he didn't witness any illegal activity. But think about this. Why is a former Israeli prime minister, someone who ran Israeli military intelligence, repeatedly visiting a convicted? Then there's Ari Ben-Menashe. Ben-Menashe is a former Israeli intelligence operative who claims that Epstein was working for Mossad, Israeli intelligence. According to Ben-Menashe, Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell were introduced to their intelligence network by Robert Maxwell in the late 1980s. Their job? Entrap powerful people, gather compromising material, blackmail, a honeypot operation. Now, you might say, that's just one guy's claim, and you'd be right. But let's keep following the thread. In 2008, Jeffrey Epstein was facing serious charges for soliciting prostitution from a minor. He should have gone to prison for decades, right? But instead, he got a deal that can only be described as unbelievable. 13 months in a county jail with work release, meaning he left jail during the day to go to his office. He was a convicted who got to leave jail for work every day. The federal prosecutor who gave him that deal was Alexander Acosta. Years later, when Acosta was nominated for a cabinet position under Trump, he was asked about the lenient plea deal. And Acosta reportedly said something very interesting. He said, "I was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone." Belonged to intelligence. Protected by intelligence. Just think about what that means. A federal prosecutor was told to back off because Epstein was an intelligence asset. For whom? In 2023, it was revealed that Epstein had documented meetings with CIA Director William Burns. These meetings happened in 2014, years after Epstein's conviction. Now, why would the director of the CIA be meeting with a convicted predator? Now, here's where it gets even murkier. A recent poll found that Republicans suspect Epstein had Israeli intelligence ties, while Democrats suspect Russian intelligence ties. But what if it's not either or? What if Epstein was connected to multiple intelligence agencies? There are allegations tying him to British intelligence through Robert Maxwell. There are documented meetings with American intelligence officials. There are his close relationships with Israeli political and military leaders. Adam Hickey, a former top official in the Department of Justice's National Security Division, has said that if Epstein was working as an intelligence asset, there might be no trace of it in official records. Because, as he said, if you are working for the government, providing information to the government, that relationship is something that neither party necessarily wants to casually be discovered. In other words, if Epstein was an intelligence asset, we might never find the smoking gun. So let's put it all together. Jeffrey Epstein had relationships with presidents, prime ministers, CEOs, scientists, and celebrities. He owned private properties, an island, a Manhattan mansion, a ranch in New Mexico, all equipped with cameras, by the way. He employed young women to massage powerful men. He collected flight logs, photos, and witnesses. And when he was caught, a federal prosecutor was told he belonged to intelligence. Allegedly. The theory is this: Epstein wasn't just a predator, he was running a blackmail operation. He would entrap powerful people, get them on camera, create leverage, and then that information could be used by intelligence agencies to control those people. Lawmakers, CEOs, scientists with access to sensitive research. Anyone with power could be compromised. And if you're an intelligence agency, Israeli, American, British, or otherwise, that's incredibly valuable. In July 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was arrested again, this time on federal sex trafficking charges. And the evidence was overwhelming, and victims were ready to testify. This time, there would be no sweetheart deal. Epstein was denied bail and held at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan, one of the most secure federal facilities in the country, mind you. And on August 10th, 2019, less than a month after his arrest, Jeffrey Epstein was found dead in his cell. The official ruling, by hanging, but the circumstances were, let's just say, suspicious. Epstein had been placed on watch after an earlier incident, but he was taken off just days before his death. The two guards assigned to check on him every 30 minutes both fell asleep. The cameras that should have been recording his cell malfunctioned. His cellmate had been transferred out, leaving him alone. And an autopsy conducted by New York City's medical examiner ruled it. But an independent autopsy hired by Epstein's brother found that Epstein's injuries were more consistent with homicide. Specifically, he had a broken bone in his neck, something more commonly seen in strangulation than hanging. Now, whether Jeffrey Epstein killed himself or was killed, one thing is certain. He died before he could testify, before he could name names, before anyone could be held fully accountable. And here's something interesting. Epstein's death mirrors another mysterious death. Remember Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine's father, the man with alleged Mossad connections? Robert Maxwell died under mysterious circumstances as well, falling off his yacht into the Atlantic Ocean. Some say it was an accident. Others believe he was murdered by intelligence agencies he'd been working for, or against. Two men, both allegedly connected to intelligence operations, both with damaging information on powerful people, both dead under mysterious circumstances. Coincidence? So, was Jeffrey Epstein working for Israeli intelligence? The circumstantial evidence is hard to ignore, right? Robert Maxwell's Mossad ties and state funeral in Israel, Ghislaine Maxwell's role as Epstein's partner, Ehud Barak's repeated visits, Ari Ben-Menashe's claims, the Wexner Foundation mission to strengthen Israeli leadership, Acosta being told Epstein belonged to intelligence. But was it just Israel? Or was Epstein part of something bigger? A network that involved multiple countries' intelligence agencies, all using him to gather compromise on the world's most powerful people. Now, I don't have all the answers, obviously, but I do know this. The official story that Epstein was just a rich weirdo with powerful friends doesn't add up. It doesn't. There are too many connections, too many protected relationships, too many unanswered questions. And the people who might have those answers? Well, Jeffrey Epstein is dead. Robert Maxwell is dead. And the files that were supposed to give us the truth? Well, let's talk about what we actually got. So the man who allegedly ran a blackmail operation for intelligence agencies is gone. But before he died, there were documents, court filings, depositions, flight logs, evidence. And for years, we were told we would get the truth. In November 2025, Congress passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act with near unanimous support, 427-1 in the House, and unanimous support in the Senate. Trump signed it into law on November 19th, giving the Justice Department 30 days to release everything. And on December 19th, the deadline, the DOJ dropped hundreds of gigabytes of documents. Photos, grand jury transcripts, FBI evidence, witness statements, and more files are still being released as we speak. So what did we actually learn from all these documents? The December 2025 release was massive, far more than the Ghislaine Maxwell case documents that came out previously. This was FBI investigation files, grand jury testimony, photos from Epstein's properties, flight logs, evidence photos, all sorts of stuff. And there are some genuinely new revelations. For one, the FBI was warned about Epstein in 1996. A survivor named Maria Farmer reported him to the FBI in September 1996. That's more than a decade before his first arrest, and the FBI did nothing. The files also revealed that Trump flew on Epstein's private plane more than previously known, at least 8 times between 1993 and 1996. Now, there are also witness statements that are deeply disturbing. One witness told investigators that Epstein asked to see a girl's identification to make sure she was underage. That he was frustrated when girls brought to him were too old, and that he insisted on young girls. Disgusting. The files also reveal that the FBI was tracking at least 10 co-conspirators, people who allegedly helped Epstein with his operation. Some were served grand jury subpoenas, but we don't know who they are. Those names are redacted. And here's something interesting. Survivors have testified that Ghislaine Maxwell was a helicopter pilot and that she would fly victims between Epstein's properties. And the December files include photos of Ghislaine flying helicopters. Now, helicopters don't require the same flight logs as planes. So if Ghislaine was flying people via helicopter between properties, say from the mainland to Epstein's Little St. James Island, there might be no official record of those trips, which could explain why someone like Bill Clinton, for example, who flew on Epstein's plane dozens of times, has no documented trips to the island itself. Maybe he never went. Or maybe he went via helicopter and there's no record. We don't know. Then there's this. The files include photos of an Austrian passport found in Epstein's Manhattan home, issued under a fake name with a Saudi Arabian address and stamps from countries all over the world. Why did Jeffrey Epstein have a fake passport? Now, the files also include a lot of photos, and I want to be very careful here because a lot of people I really respect have been running wild with these, treating reports and allegations as cold, hard evidence. And look, I get it. The temptation is there. We all want answers. But I didn't start this YouTube channel to just chase headlines or feed confirmation bias. I started it to do the actual work, to research, to source, to separate fact from speculation, and especially to practice discernment. Because if Jeffrey Epstein was running a blackmail operation for intelligence agencies, if powerful people were complicit, if there's been a decades-long cover-up, then we owe it to the victims to get the truth right. Not the convenient truth, not the sensational truth, the actual truth. So let's talk about what we actually know versus what people are claiming. There are photos of Bill Clinton, like so many photos of Bill Clinton. Clinton in a hot tub with a redacted person who the DOJ confirmed is a victim. Clinton on Epstein's plane, Clinton at events with Epstein. There are also photos of Donald Trump, Trump at parties with Epstein and Maxwell, photos of Trump with many redacted women. Now, here's the thing. Being in a photo doesn't mean you committed a crime. It doesn't even necessarily mean you knew what was happening. And if Jeffrey Epstein was an intelligence agent collecting compromat, he knew that his reputation alone would be enough to smear someone. So, getting photos with people was one of the easiest ways to gain leverage, even if they couldn't be persuaded to actually commit crimes. Some of these photos are from the 90s, before Epstein's crimes were widely known. Some are from events with dozens of people. Context matters. And we need to be honest about that. Not because it's comfortable, but because if we treat every piece of evidence the same way, we lose credibility. And credibility is the only thing we have. And then there are allegations that are much darker. One FBI tip released in the files alleges that Trump was present when a 13-year-old girl's newborn baby was murdered and dumped in Lake Michigan in 1984. The tip was submitted in August 2020, right before the presidential election, by an unnamed woman who claims she was sex trafficked by her uncle and Jeffrey Epstein when she was 13. Now, I need to be very clear about something. This is an FBI tip, not an investigation finding, not corroborated testimony. It's an allegation submitted through an online form on the FBI's website. You could literally go to the FBI website right now and submit a tip saying anything about anyone anonymously. And that's not to say that tips are meaningless. Sometimes they lead to real investigations. But a tip existing doesn't mean it's been verified. It doesn't mean it has been investigated. It just means someone submitted the tip. And people often confuse reported to the FBI with investigated by the FBI. Those are very different things. In this case, when you look at all the details in the tip, there's no evidence that Trump and Epstein even knew each other in 1984. And neither of them had any documented connections to Lake Michigan at the time. Though, it is worth noting that Trump later opened a riverboat casino on Lake Michigan in 1996. Make of that what you will. This tip was also submitted in August 2020, after Epstein's death and right before the presidential election. And at that time, both Epstein and Trump had been heavily featured in the news cycle. The DOJ did say that some of these documents contain untrue and sensationalist claims made against President Trump that were submitted to the FBI right before the 2020 election. The FBI declined to comment on whether they ever investigated it. So what do we do with that? If it's true, it's beyond horrific, obviously. But we don't know if it's true. And this is exactly why I'm doing the work to separate fact from fiction. Because when you mix verified evidence with unverified tips, when you release millions of pages without context, when you redact inconsistently, it becomes impossible to know what's real and what isn't. Someone could use this tip to say, Trump is in the files for murdering a baby. Someone else could use the DOJ's disclaimer to say, it's all made up to hurt Trump. And the truth is, we probably will never know, because there's no indication the FBI ever investigated this claim. No follow-up, no corroboration, just a tip in a database. And that's the problem with how these files were released. What we have are pieces, fragments, allegations, and a lot of redactions. Like a lot of redactions. Hundreds of pages are completely blacked out. One grand jury document is 119 pages, and every single page is redacted. 3 consecutive documents totaling 255 pages, completely blacked out. And here's what's wild. The redactions are inconsistent. The same information will be redacted in one document, but visible in another. Names of FBI agents and prosecutors are redacted, even though they weren't supposed to be. But in some cases, the redactions were done so poorly that people online were able to unredact them and recover the information underneath. Which raises the question, what are they hiding? Because the law says you can't redact something just because it would be embarrassing to a public figure. You can only redact to protect victims or active investigations. So why are so many pages completely blank? And then on Christmas Eve, the Justice Department dropped another announcement. Yay. They found over 1 million additional documents potentially related to the Epstein case. 1 million. But here's what really got me, okay? The DOJ later admitted that everything they've released so far all those hundreds of gigabytes, is less than 1% of the files they have. Less than 1%. They're still reviewing more than 2 million documents. Okay, look, I haven't gone through all of these documents myself. There are hundreds of thousands of pages and they're still being released. But from what I have seen, here's what I can tell you. There are no smoking guns. There are new details, there are disturbing allegations, and there are suspicious connections. But there's no hard proof of a world leader committing a crime. There's no document that says Epstein was working for Mossad and here's his handler. There's no client list with names and services rendered. And unfortunately, I don't think we're ever going to get that. Because if Epstein was running an intelligence operation, the most damaging evidence was never going to just be in the FBI files. It was in his safe, on his servers, in the hands of intelligence agencies. And that evidence, it's gone, or it's classified, or it's being used as leverage right now. And while we're all arguing about redacted photos and flight logs, well, we're taking over Venezuela.
Venezuela has also agreed that the United States will immediately begin refining and selling up to 50 million barrels of Venezuelan crude oil.
And Lindsey Graham is already hinting at making moves on Cuba.
You just wait for Cuba.
And he's wearing a Make Iran Great Again hat.
I hope that 2026 will be the year that we make Iran great again.
What is that? So the world is moving on and the Epstein files are becoming background noise. Here's where we are. Jeffrey Epstein trafficked and abused hundreds of young girls for decades. The FBI was warned about him in 1996 and did nothing. He got a sweetheart deal in 2008 because he belonged to intelligence. He died under suspicious circumstances before he could testify. The DOJ has released less than 1% of the files. The 10 co-conspirators that the FBI identified, well, their names are redacted. The powerful people who participated are still walking free. And the intelligence agencies that may have used Epstein's operation, they're not even part of the conversation. But here's what I keep coming back to. The victims, the girls who were trafficked, the women who came forward, the survivors who have been fighting for justice for decades. They don't get to move on. They don't get to just say, this is too exhausting and tune out. So neither can we. This isn't just about Jeffrey Epstein. This is about a system that protected him for decades. This is about whether we, as citizens, are going to accept less than 1% of the files. That we're going to even accept that all of these people just get to walk freely without consequences. Because I don't know about you, but I am not okay with that. So we keep the conversation going. We don't let this story get memory hold under 2 million pages of redacted documents. We keep asking questions. We work together because that's exactly what they don't want us to do. And while we're paying attention to Epstein, we also need to pay attention to what's happening in the world. The stories they're hoping we're too distracted to notice. So if you want to stay informed, if you want to see me break down what's really happening in Venezuela, spoiler alert, it's not about drugs, then subscribe to this channel. And if you found this video helpful, share it. Please share it with your friends, your family, anyone trying to make sense of all of this. Because the more of us who are paying attention, the harder it is for them to hide the truth. I'm going to keep digging. I'm going to keep researching. I'm going to keep making videos because the truth is out there. It's just buried under layers of classified documents and intelligence operations and powerful people who do not want us to find it. But we will, one video at a time. And if you want to understand more about the connections I've been tracing, about how foreign influence, money, and power intersect in Washington, check out my video on Trump's ties to Israel. Because all of these stories, well, they're connected. And we're not going to stop until we get to the truth. Because the victims deserve that, and so do we. Thank you for watching.